Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. As Richard mentioned, my name is Huwaida Alawiye. I'm a food law advisor here at Camden BRI, and I am part of the Global Regulatory Affairs team, in which we cover over 80 countries worldwide. I mainly support with Arabic-speaking markets in the Middle East and North African region, and our services in regulatory affairs include regulatory inquiring support, compliance reviews, food legislation update, translations, training courses, formulation checks, among other services. And if you have any regulatory inquiries and you need any regulatory support, this is our email address, and feel free to reach out. So today we will be discussing the 2021 GSO updates that GSO or GCC Standardization Organization have been working on towards during this year. So for those who don't know, I will do a quick introduction to GSO. So GSO or GCC Standardization Organization is a regional standardization organization that has been established by the resolution of the GCC Supreme Council in December 2001 and assumed its operation in May 2004. The members of GSO are Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, and Kuwait. So these members are obliged to use or to follow the GSO legislation and to use them as their national legislation. But we should always keep in mind that these countries as well have their own national authorities, and some national requirements may or may not apply depending on the country and depending on the product in question. So as I mentioned before, GSO released over 200 new standards this year, and these new standards are coming in force or will come in force at the beginning of 2022, and this may affect food and beverage operators in the region, as well as food and beverage operators that export to the GCC. If you want to have a better understanding or have a look at the standards, you can go to the GSO standard store on gso.org.sa. But please keep in mind that the standards are not free of charge. You will need to purchase them. And because they're very recent and there are standards that are being released as we speak, you will only find the Arabic version, but they usually release the English version right after the Arabic version is released. So it just takes a bit of time for the English translated standard to be on their store. We have a lot of standards that have been released. We will not have time to go through all the 200 standards, unfortunately, but I picked the main ones that I know will affect most of food and drink operators. And the first standard that I want to discuss today is GSO 2233-2021, which is the requirements for nutritional labeling. This standard covers the procedures and sets the procedures that need to be followed for food and nutritional labeling. I will go through some of the things that have been updated in the new standards. So first of all, the new standard has now a longer list of products that are exempt from having a nutritional information table. The previous version had that, but it only had two products or two food categories, which was the raw products and the food for for special dietary use, such as baby milk, baby food, sport drinks, food for special medical uses. These ones have their own standard. And these two food categories were in the previous standard. To these two were added also food that have low level of calories, food for direct consumption, single ingredient foods, bottled drinking water, food in small packages, food additives, food that require more processing, and outer pack of food sold through self-service. These ones will have the nutritional information displayed in the self-service entity. So this is a good tool because it helps us understand more what the standard actually covers and which product we need to have a nutritional information table on. Another thing that's very important that we need to be aware of is the minimum mandatory nutrient declaration that's been updated. So now more nutrients need to be declared on our label. So now we need to declare the energy value, protein, available carbohydrate, and dietary fiber, fat, trans fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, sodium, total sugar, and added sugar. So the nutrients in red are the ones that have been now mandatory. And if you have mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids, those ones need to also be declared if your product contains them. We should always keep in mind that additional requirements may apply based on the product in question and based on the market in question, and also if you make any nutritional claims on your product. And also, I would like to add to this slide that you may possibly be already adding these ingredients on your nutritional information table because some markets, such as Saudi Arabia, already requires additional nutrient declaration to the other markets in the GCC. So if you already do that, it could be the case of a market requirement or a national requirement or a case of a product-specific requirement as well. Other things that were changed in the standard are stuff such as the conversion factor of alcohol and polyols is now removed from the standard. So we cannot really calculate the content of alcohol and polyol in our products or put it on our nutritional information table. More nutrients were added to the nutrient reference value list. So if you voluntarily choose to add the percentage of their daily value on your nutritional information table, now you need to have another look at the new standard to see if new nutrients have been added so that you also add the percentage for them. Because if you add the percentage DV on your table, you need to be compliant with the nutrient reference value list in the nutritional information table. Another thing that is helpful with the calculation of our nutrients is the list of rounding limits and the list of tolerant limits that have been added also to the standard. So these are also helpful tool for us in order to create our nutritional information table. So we now need to have another look at our tables and see if they are compliant with the requirements of the new standard. Moving on to another important standard that was also updated this year, which is a GSO 2538-2021, the maximum limits for residues of ethanol in our food. This standard sets the requirement of the maximum residue limits for ethyl alcohol resulting from natural cross-fermentation in food or used as a flavoring solvent and acceptable to consider the food free of ethanol. So the previous scope did not have the wording used as a flavoring solvent. This is good because it helps us understand that it's not only that the standard does not only cover the ethanol that results from natural cross-fermentation in food, but also the ethanol that comes from the addition of some flavorings to our products and the limits related to those ones as well. The standard has definitions, just like all the other standards. And one of the definitions that has also been clarified in the standard is the one related to free from ethanol. So the standard defines a food as free of ethanol when its content in ethanol produced by natural fermentation is so small that is equal to or less than the percentages specified for each of the food categories defined in Table 1 of the standard. So it's basically telling us that the food, according to the standard, the food will be considered free of ethanol if the limits are less than the limits, less or equal to the limits set by the standard. And if what's stated in the product-specific technical regulations conflicts with the provisions of this technical regulation, the provisions of this technical regulation shall be implemented. So the standard is also telling us that the requirements of this standard will supersede any product-specific requirement. This sentence was available in the previous standard, but it has been a bit clarified more and explained more in order to give us a better understanding on what the standard is really about. In the previous version of the standard, we had a list of general requirements, which we still have in the new version, but this specific requirement was available in the previous version of the standard. And it just explains the presence of the ethanol in our food. And it was telling us that the ethanol is present in a wide range of foods in very small quantities due to natural fermentation that is known as alcoholic fermentation, or as a result of the addition of some flavorings and concentrates that are used in food manufacturing, where alcohol or ethyl alcohol is present among other components as a solvent, most of which will volatilize when exposed to heat. This statement is no longer available in the current legislation, and the standard is well, what's happening in the new standard is that it is trying to limit the reasons or limit the use of the ethanol in food. Another thing in the general requirement that changed is the fact that now one of the general requirements is that we cannot use the claim alcohol-free or anything that might symbolize to it on our label. So if we had a product that had ethanol that is compliant with the limits of the standard in the past, and we had claimed it as alcohol-free, now we have to remove this claim from our product, and we cannot use it anymore or use any wording that is similar to it on our label. Table 1 of the standard is the most important part, is one of the most important parts of the standard because it sets the limits of ethanol that we can find in our final product and we are permitted to use in our final product. The previous list had 8 categories. The new one has 13 food categories. Some new categories were added, such as pickles and dairy products. And we also have categories that have been shuffled, such as chocolate, sweets, and desserts. That is now one category, when in the previous version, chocolates had its own category and desserts was mixed with a different category. So we have now more categories that are added, ones that are shuffled, and that means we now have new limits or possibly have new limits for our products. I'm going to give you some examples from the standard and compare it with the previous version. So for example, in the 2017 version, the food categories for juices and beverages in general were grouped in one category. So juices, different types of cocktails, drinks and ready-to-drink flavored water were in one category, and drinks and concentrates were with sauces and ketchup. Now we have 4 different categories for beverages, and that means that each one of these categories will have its own permissible limits of ethanol, and we have a category of sauces, ketchup, ready-to-eat foods, and foods prepared from fruits and vegetables. So this one changed a bit. They removed the drinks from it and they added prepared foods and ready-to-eat foods. And they also removed the herbal oils. So this is just to show you that we need to be very aware that the food categories changed. That means that the limits also have changed. And some limits also changed in the same category. So it could be the case of the food category is still the same, but the limit changed, such as processed foods made from meat, grains, legumes, fats, oils, seafood, spices. The limit was for ethanol was 0.3%. Now the limit has dropped to 0.05%. And we have a category that's called others, in which if we didn't find our product in the previous categories, we will have to abide by the limits of the others category. And in the past, the limit was 0.02%. Now the limit is 0.2%. So this is just to let you know that we need to take a look at the new standard and see if the limits of ethanol in our product are still compliant or are now compliant with with the requirements of the new standard. Another also important standard that was updated in 2021 is the additives permitted for use in foodstuff, which is GSO 2500/2021. This standard sets the additives that are permitted for use in foodstuff, and the standard tells us that the use of additives is based on GSO 2500 and is also subject to the requirements of the product specific GSO standard. So we always need to keep this in mind. The standard now has way more additives that have been added to it. So the previous version was 223 pages. The new standard now has 627 pages, which means we have a wide range of new additives that have now been included in the standard. And that means as well that if in the past we didn't find the additive that is related to our food category, and we may have applied the requirements of Codex or the national legislation of the country of export. Now we have to go back to the new standard and see if we have new limits for the newly added additives, and we need to be compliant with those limits as well. Another thing that was added to the standard, which is the food categories that are now listed at the beginning of the standard, because the standard originally is food category system based. So each food category has its own approved additives with their limits. This is a good tool to have. It is a good tool to have our food categories at the beginning of the standard, because we can pinpoint the category that our product is the closest to, and based on that we can find our additives in the list. So as I mentioned before, new additives have now been included, or additional details to the already existing additives also have been included. For example, I just used 3 examples out of many in the standard. Acesulfam potassium is now in the new standard, and we have limits for it that cover most food categories. Bleach starch was in the previous version, but now we have more limits and more details related to bleached starch in the new standard. And sunset yellow was also available in the previous standard, but now we have the limits for sunset yellow in additional categories. So a lot of changes have happened in this specific standard, and that also means that we will need to have another look at our formulations and another look at our products to see if the limits of the additives are compliant with the requirements of GSO 2500. Similarly to the additives permitted for use in foodstuff, GSO 707 2021, which is the flavorings permitted for use in foodstuff, is also available in the standard store and has also been updated. So this standard covers natural, artificial flavorings and flavoring enhancers that are permitted for use in foodstuff. The previous version of the standard had 18 pages with 2 amendments with 1 or 2 pages each. The new version now has 166 pages, and the food categories that are listed in the standards cover all of these new flavorings. So, as I mentioned before, the standard lists the flavors that are permitted for use in food with the following conditions. So the standard has 4 tables, one of them that lists the food categories, and 3 that list the levels of additives, of flavorings that are permitted for use in foodstuff, or the flavorings that are permitted for use in foodstuff. So the first table lists the maximum level of biological active substances. This one has now more biological active substances added to it. The flavorings and flavor enhancers listed in table 3 do not have limits, but they are just listed to tell us that these artificial flavorings are permitted for use in our foods. And this list is the one that has been updated the most and has been a lot of other flavorings have been added to it. And the final table is table 4, in which we have the plants and plant parts that we cannot use in our food products. So again, if you had a product in which you didn't find a flavor in the previous standard, and for instance, the flavor was not permitted to use in the previous standard, now we have to take another look at the new standard, because it could be the case that the flavor has now been added to the new standard and you can use it in your product, or you have now different levels of biological active substances from natural flavorings that are updated and that you need to be compliant with. Much more 2021 standards that have been updated this year, and a lot of them are also product-specific standards, so you also need to be aware of those, such as flavored drinks, malt beverage, which is the non-alcoholic beer, contaminants and toxins in food and feed, food contact material, fresh, natural, pure use on food labeling of drinking water, halal packaging. So the general guidelines for halal packaging has been updated. However, the general requirements for halal products is yet to be updated. So we still have the 2015 version for that one. We have also the requirements for handling ready-to-eat food, food supplements, and food for special dietary use. All of these standards and many other food-specific standards have been updated this year. Moving on to some drafts and some things to expect for 2022. A very hot topic that was discussed this year is the front of pack traffic light labeling, which has mainly been discussed in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia. So in the UAE, as part of the National Program for Happiness and Well-Being, the standard number 5034/2018 has been released, but it was made voluntary in 2019. So this standard covers the requirements for front of pack traffic light labeling. The discussion was for the standard to become mandatory in January 2022. However, this has not been confirmed, and the date for this to become mandatory is still under discussion. So we are yet to have any confirmation on the date for the traffic light labeling to become mandatory in 2022 in the UAE. Some of the formats that have been released is this one. So it's based on the green, red, and yellow colors, and it sets the limits based on the nutrient content of our product. And it's the same case for Saudi Arabia. The standard has also been released in 2018 in order to encourage people to adopt healthier lifestyles. And this standard also was made voluntary, and the date for it to become mandatory is yet to be announced. However, very recently, Saudi FDA has released a new draft in September 2021 for the same standard, but the draft does not mention if the front of pack traffic light labeling will become mandatory. The standard also suggests this format to be used. So we still do not have any confirmations on the dates for the traffic light labeling to become mandatory just yet. But this is something that we need to be aware of, and we need to be prepared for in 2022. Just keep an eye on this subject. More draft standards are still being released. I just picked the very recent ones. So for example, a draft standard for frozen carrots has been released, certain pulses also, edible olive oils, and Saudi FDA is releasing standards that are related to encouraging people and raising their awareness on healthier lifestyles. So they released a standard that is related to the requirements of food products with high nutritional value based on nutrient profiling model. So this is just to let you know that more standards are being worked on, more drafts are being worked on, and they will be coming in force later next year. So what does that mean for food and beverage businesses? These new standards and drafts that are being released this year will mean that we will need to have another look at our products formulation and compositional check and composition of our products. So we need to have another look at them and see if they are compliant with the new standards. We will need to have another look at our nutritional information table to see if it's compliant with the new standard. We might need to review our labels as well to make sure that they are compliant with the new standard. And if any product specific standard has been updated, we might need to look at those as well and see if the changes apply to our product. These are the main things that we need to be aware of. In terms of dates, some of the standards such as GSO 2233/2021, which is the nutritional information, the requirements for nutritional information, has already been adopted in countries such as Saudi Arabia, and the rest of the GCC will follow. There are not specific dates that have been released to when the standards will come in force, or when the standards will be adopted, but they usually take 180 days for the standard to come in force after it's been adopted. So this is something that we need to be aware of. No dates are confirmed, but we need to be prepared for the beginning of 2022 because GSO is releasing all these standards and is making them active on their standard store. So those are all, those new standards have a projected date of the beginning of 2022. I think this comes to an end for my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. Back to you, Richard.
Okay, thank you very much, Huwaida. There was a fantastic overview of the current regulatory situation in that part of the world, and it was very competently delivered. So thank you very much for that. If you have a question for Huwaida, now is probably a good time to type it in, and we'll see if we can come back to some of those at the end. So I wanted to finish up just by explaining a few different ways that you can keep up to date with what's going on at Camden BRI and our latest our latest news and the content that's relevant to you. A lot of you will be aware that we have a newsfeed email system, which several of you have already signed up to. It's how you found out about this webinar. But for those of you that haven't, then you can sign up to those. They're free for members and non-members. And one list in particular that's relevant to this group is legislation. So that's worth having a look at. If you're from a member company, then Food Law Alert is our fortnightly update of EU and UK legislation. So again, that's delivered via email. If you're interested in that, then sign up through the newsfeed page that you've just seen. We have several upcoming events. I won't go through all of these now, but there's more information available online. Conference based on food safety and quality culture is coming up soonest, and there's a whole range of food and drink legislation related courses taking place early next year. For member companies, we also have the member interest groups. You've just missed the most recent round, but they're essentially free networking events for member companies. They used to be held in person in Chipping Camden, but they're currently held online. Everyone has got its own area of interest, and regulatory affairs overlaps with several of those topics. So if you find one that's of interest to you, then by all means join the group. You don't have to attend. You can attend whenever you're available. And likewise, if you're overseas and can't attend, or if they do become face-to-face events again, you can't get to the meetings, you can still access the content. So those are well worth signing up to if you're a member. If you use social media, then we're active on all of the major social media platforms. So those are the links to get there. So that brings us to the end of the session for today. We'll now have a look at some of the questions that you've been asking along the way. So what I'll do is I'll read them out for Huwaida to try and answer, and we'll do the best that we can to answer them for you. If we don't get round to answering your question today, then by all means get in touch at a later time. So Huwaida, are you still there?
Yes, still there.
Okay, brilliant. So the first question we've been asked is about GSO 2500 and whether or not it's well aligned with Codex on additives. Are we able to say anything about that?
Yeah, so the standard is usually based on Codex, so I would say so, and on EU legislation, but that does not mean that we should rely on Codex when we're looking at the food additives for the GCC. We should be looking at GSO 2500 in order to be compliant with that standard, basically.
Okay, excellent. So the next question is about traffic light labelling and whether or not it's voluntary or mandatory. I think we addressed some of that towards the end for specific countries. Can we say anything else about other countries, or is that all we know for now?
Yeah, so it's voluntary. It is still voluntary in all of the countries, and the main discussion is for it to become mandatory in 2022 in the UAE mainly and in Saudi Arabia. But for the time being, I mean, for now, it is still voluntary, yes.
Okay, excellent. The next question we've got is, I think that's a substance. It's been described as TiO2. Does that mean anything to you?
No, I will need to look into that or like further look into it.
Okay. I'm
Yeah.
guessing that's a chemical symbol of some kind. I'm not sure what the ingredient is there, but that's something we could come back to another time if you're able to get in touch. So we've been asked about requirements for nutrition labeling in on restaurant menus. Can we say anything about that?
So this standard covers mainly prepackaged products. I know that in the GCC or in the UAE mainly, they are requiring the restaurants to have their nutritional information displayed on their menus, but this standard covers prepackaged products.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a question about the language that's used. We've been asked, is it mandatory for nutrition labeling to be in Arabic, presumably in the countries that it applies to?
Yes, so Arabic is a mandatory requirement for these countries, and having nutritional information table is a mandatory requirement. And GSO 9/2013 tells us that all mandatory requirements that we need to have on our label need to be in Arabic. So yes, we need to have it in Arabic language.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a question about conversion factors for polyols. That might be a little bit too specific to answer right now, but would you know the answer to that, conversion factors for polyols?
So all I can answer is that it's been removed from the new standard, so it's not there anymore. It was available in the previous version, but it's not there anymore. I don't know the numbers specifically because those are numbers, and I wouldn't be able to tell you what was the latest or the previous conversion factor, but I can tell you that it's been removed now from the standard. So there's no number for it or no value for it in the new standard.
Okay, thank you. We've just had confirmation that TiO2 stands for titanium dioxide. I thought it might, but I didn't want to risk it without knowing for sure. So the original question then was, the EU has banned titanium dioxide. Is there any work in progress in the GCC? Presumably that means to replace it or to find an alternative. Can we say anything about that?
I'm not aware of any work in progress related to it at the moment in the GCC. It could be the case that if it's available in the additive lists, the limits for it have been lessened, or it's not available in the additives list anymore. But I'm not aware of a specific work that has been done on that in that region just yet.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm getting conscious of the time, so we'll have to make this our final question. As I said, if you want to get in touch at a later time, then feel free. But this final question is about labelling rules for products sold as duty-free in airports. Are the rules the same, or do they have are they separate from everything we've been talking about?
It's going to be depending on the product, and some products such as alcohol will need special approvals, but generally it really depends on the product and on the country in question as well. So I cannot give you a specific answer because it's going to depend on the product and it's going to depend on the market in question. Mainly the main mandatory legal labeling requirements apply, but again, we need to take a look and have a better understanding on the product and the market in question.
Okay, so it's something we would need to consider on a case-by-case basis.
Definitely.
Okay. All right then, so that brings us to the end of the session today. So thank you very much for joining us and for sort of listening to our presentation and for asking your questions as well. And thank you to Huwaida for her delivery of the content and for answering your questions so competently. Hopefully you've all managed to get something out of the session today. You have our contact details there if you want to get in touch to provide any feedback. So all that remains to be said is thank you very much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day and all the best. Thank you very much.